back. And if you have a question after we get started, just raise your hand and one of our volunteers will bring you a sheet with a pen, fold it, give it back to them, and they'll bring it to me, and it'll remain anonymous. I also wanted to let you know that our event tonight is being live webcast for all of our commuter and online students, or Dallas campuses or Houston campuses. So please be aware that you will be on live webcast if you were to say something or anything like that. If you submit your question anonymously, it won't be an issue. I just wanted to let you know. We've also got someone here from the LASA who's going to be taking photos. So, just be aware of that. There's nothing weird going on, okay? And before we get started, I just want to let you all know we do have a counselor from the counseling center here in the back, right here, with her teal bandana. So if you at any point feel like you need to talk to somebody, she's right there. If you need to grab her, and she will be more than willing to talk to you a little bit. And before we get going, I wanted to give you guys all the opportunity to introduce yourselves. Okay. Our lovely panelists.
My name is Dr. Linda Rubin. I'm a professor in the psychology department here, and I am a licensed psychologist.
I am Dr. Connie Bernard. I'm the Director of Student Health Services. I'm an MD. We see lots of patients for all kinds of reasons.
I'm Lieutenant Elizabeth Hawley. I'm the Lieutenant of Support Services at TWU, and I'm a certified Texas Peace Officer.
My name is Sarah Bergman. I'm the Project Red Counselor through Denton County Friends of the Family through partnership with that outreach.
My name is Donna Bloom. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Legal Services from Denton County Friends of the Family. I act as their staff attorney, and I'm probably here to answer the legal questions, if there are.
Thank you, Brad. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our first question, which is, how much family violence really goes on? So I think the question is about prevalence. Anybody, just feel free to shout.
We're talking about the university community.
It doesn't specify, but you have a lot of expertise.
We do have some out here, especially in our family living situation. I've been in law enforcement 37 years, and there's this many people out there. We have about this much, maybe one or two a semester, before we get calls to answer domestic violence.
So that's reported violence. What we know about domestic violence is it's probably one of the least reported crimes, that and sexual assault. All the research indicates to us that 1 out of every 4 relationships has some form of domestic violence happening in it. So to put that in context, if you think about where you live before you lived here, and you go outside and look at your neighbor across the street, and the one that lives next door to you, and the one that lives next door to you on the other side, one of those is experiencing some level of violence in their home. And in terms of teen dating violence, we know that what research is indicating to us is that it's actually higher in that population. 1 in 3 dating relationships has some form of domestic violence. And obviously, when you ask a question like that, that it's important to define what violence is. And probably maybe we're going to get one of those questions, so we'll get into that a little bit later. But when we're talking about violence, Sarah and I, at least, when we talk about it from Friends of the Family, we use a very broad definition of violence. So we're not talking about people getting bruised and broken bones. We're talking about a whole array of behaviors that I'm sure we'll get into.
I would just add that rate of 1 in 4 that Donna just spoke about is across all partnered relationships. So that includes heterosexual relationships and same-sex relationships.
That's correct.
And I'll actually go ahead and ask that question that we have is there more than one kind of abuse?
Yeah, I think like Donna said, we talk about it friends and family, the different types of abuse that we look at, and maybe our agency's definition is a little more broad than some abuse, but we look at verbal abuse, name calling, that sort of thing, emotional abuse, which could be like isolation, whether that's social, financial dependence on your abuser, that sort of thing, and then obviously your physical abuse, and then we also look at sexual abuse within relationships, and we find that a lot of our clients, they're more readily admitting of the physical abuse, and so a lot of times sexual abuse is part of relationship violence, but, you know, it's a lot harder for clients to talk about. But it's important to recognize that it's a part of that.
And also within some relationships, there may be all of those aspects going on, but in other relationships, there may be only the emotional abuse. There may be only small components of it, but it doesn't make one less important or less hurtful than any other.
A lot of times what we're going to be looking for at Friends and Family when we're assessing somebody for they come in for an intake and they're looking for help, we're looking for a pattern of behavior with the goal of that behavior with the intent of trying to dominate or control somebody. So typically we would be looking at physical violence, but we're going to be asking a lot of other questions about who makes decisions. Do you feel safe to make decisions? What happens if you make a decision that your partner doesn't like? You know, who controls the money? If you live together, do you have a bank account that you have access to? You know, those kinds of behaviors that can be indicative of an abusive relationship. One of the other areas of violence that we're looking at too that doesn't get often talked about is spiritual violence. So we see a lot of that. We live in the Bible Belt. People can really take their faith and distort it. No, doesn't matter what faith it is. It's every faith can be distorted to put someone in a position where they feel like they've got to comply because that's what their faith system says. And so we talk a lot about that as well.
Thank you. Next question. What is the difference between a normal, healthy amount of conflict within couples and abusive, unhealthy conflict?
I think it kind of goes back to what Donna was saying as we look for a pattern of power and control in a relationship. We all know that healthy relationships involve conflict. It could be said that if you don't have any conflict in your relationship, that could be just as unhealthy, right? It's just not natural. We're humans, we have emotions. It's how you express those and how you do those in a healthy manner. And so when you're looking at the balance between what's appropriate conflict and what's not, you're looking at what is the purpose behind that conflict. Is it to maintain power and control over another individual? Then you're looking at abusive behavior.
Thank you. And then going along with that, are small amounts of violence normal in a healthy relationship?
No. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that I frequently ask folks when they're coming to talk to me, and, you know, not everybody that comes to talk to us at Friends and Family totally believes that they're battered or abused, you know, and so they may be coming to talk to a lawyer because they're afraid they're going to get their kids taken away, but they're not totally buying into the idea that they're battered or abused. And so, you know, when they're talking to me, I may ask them some questions, and one of the number one questions I ask is, do you feel afraid? Is there a time that you feel fear? Because there is one emotion that I think we can all agree is not a healthy and appropriate emotion in a relationship, and that's fear. There may be some anger, there may be some hostility, even some aggression, you know, and we could probably all talk about on a continuum what's appropriate and what's not. But if there's fear, then you know that's a really good indicator that we've crossed over into something that's really inappropriate. But I think we all agree that there's no real low-end physical violence that's appropriate in a relationship. In fact, it's the low-end physical violence that's the beginning. It's the doorway drug to the higher-end forms of violence that begin to happen.
It's one of the reasons that programs like this are important, because it's easy for people who don't know or haven't been educated to think, well, you know, maybe I got slapped, and is that okay? Is that normal? Maybe it's not that big of a deal. And for some, especially in dating violence, especially even in high school, where it's more important for some young women that whoever they're going on the date with calls them back. They want to be called back, and they think, well, if I got slapped, maybe that's okay as long as he calls me again. And it's not okay. And it is the potential beginning of something much more serious. So it's why this kind of conversation is so crucial.
I think it's also too important to remember that we have clients at Friends of the Family who have been enduring verbal and emotional abuse for years, And it can take years for physical violence to escalate to that point where it gets to that point. So they're thinking they're okay because there's been, up in for 7 years maybe it's just been verbal and emotional. It's not that bad, but it can take that long, and then something physical happens. So I think it's important to remember that it's not a short-term thing. That progression can be very long-term as well. So that awareness is important.
Next, I'm sure a lot of people watch an MTV show named Teen Mom. And in recent episodes, Amber, a teenage mother, has been the one who abuses her boyfriend and the father of her child. She has abused him verbally, emotionally, and physically. What are your recommendations when the abuse is started from a female and not a male? It seems that not enough emphasis is put on female abusers, whether it be physical, emotional, or verbal. We got several questions of this nature.
I don't think that you can say it's only men who abuse. That is certainly not true. Any kind of relationship, there can be abuse, whether it's from the woman towards the man, in a same-sex couple, one versus the other. And I have encountered some people coming in saying, well, my boyfriend does this to me, but it's okay because I do this back to him. And it's like, well, in a healthy relationship, both men might consider some other things to do to resolve the conflict. So I think that that is a misconception. It's something that only men do to women. That is very untrue. And sometimes you may say, oh, this type of person has more potential to be abusive than another. What you see in public may not be what's going on behind closed doors. So I think if the woman, and I have not seen that particular show, but I think if a woman is abusing the man, that is just as wrong as a man abusing a woman. And sometimes it's harder for the man in that situation to ask for any kind of assistance, because that's one of those things in our society that just, quote, isn't supposed to happen. Same as, men can be sexually abused the same as women, and that's another thing that it's not supposed to happen. I think it's harder for them to reach out and get help, but sometimes they definitely need it, same as women.
I'd say that it's a highly complex question, because we certainly all agree that there are women and girls who are abusive to their partners. There's no disputing that. We help men and boys that runs the family. The actual just direct answer to the question, which was, what's the response? The response is the same. I mean, you respond the same to a man that's being battered as you would to a woman. But the question then references the Teen Moms program, and there's a lot of complexity to that. And maybe one fun thing to do sometime is to watch some of that programming and look at sort of the dynamics that are occurring between Amber and her partner, and examine the choices and the behaviors that are happening. And not that Amber's behavior is appropriate, because it's not, and it's actually criminal. Unfortunately for her, because when you assault somebody, no matter how minor it might be, or if you're smaller than them or whatever, it's still a criminal act, right? But it's complicated, because we know that if you just look at the raw data on who's getting hurt in the United States, it's overwhelmingly women being hurt by men. I mean, there's no, that's not, it's not highly disputed when you talk about like hard data, like who's getting murdered. All right, if you look at just, can't dispute it, someone's dead. If they're from an intimate relationship, it's overwhelmingly women being killed by men, by their estranged girlfriends, by their estranged husbands or their ex-boyfriends. And so, it's hard, because we want to make sure that we're focusing on the violence of girls and women, but we don't want to get so distracted by it that we lose focus on the fact that the vast majority of violence that's happening is happening directed at women and girls. So we need to do both, but what I find sometimes in the media, like Amber's on the front cover of Teen or US, and this issue is coming up a lot, is that when you get something that even though it's isolated or the media really jumps on it, focuses on it, and we sort of devour it, and then start to create a norm from it. And that's dangerous because then you start deciding where money should funnel, where attention should funnel, and where you're putting your attention on issues, and we just don't want to get distracted. That said, does it happen? Absolutely. Do we have male victims at Friends of the Family? We absolutely do. And we provide services despite, I would say a lot of the victims that are men are battered by their gay partners, which goes back to Dr. Rubin's point earlier. And women that are battering in lesbian relationships. And so a lot of the victims that we get in that have female batterers are women that are in lesbian relationships. But it certainly exists.
And like Donna said, our treatment is the same. We have violence intervention and prevention programs for batterers at Friends of the Family, and so they all focus on accountability for your actions and responsibility. Our programs are not anger management, which is a common myth, and common myth that can help in those situations. We don't focus on that. We look at, emotional intimacy, respect, how to raise children. It's a 27-week program, and so it's really comprehensive. But we have both female and male groups at Friends of the Family, so we do see that.
There is a controversy in the research literature around this very question. Because if you look at the split in the empirical research, you find that most of the research suggests what you're hearing here, that the majority of folks who are victims of severe violence are women, and that violence is perpetrated by men. However, the controversy is raised because there is a small but growing body of research which suggests that at very young ages, so we're talking 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, at very young ages, the rates of violence in dating relationships are more comparable. That is, you see girls being violent to boys, and you see boys being violent to girls. And so there's less of a discrepancy at that younger age. Then, as people tend to get older, and as boys become men and have greater upper body strength than most women, then you start to see the severity increase. And that's where you get these most severe and dangerous kinds of circumstances like what Donna was talking about.
Well, and I'm not an academician. I'll leave that to Dr. Rubin for sure. I will yield to her on that every time. But it's interesting to think about that because where you have more parity between genders is 15, 16, 17 years old, which makes sense to me. I can see that anecdotally, just in being out and communicating with that age group. But then you see it, changing, right?
That's right.
And maybe part of it is about strength, but also consider that maybe it's about something a little bit more radical in terms of thinking about power control. So a 15-year-old who doesn't have a bank account, doesn't share a baby, or doesn't have a house with someone, who doesn't have a car, or they're sort of more positioned in a dating relationship more equally. But then as that young woman progresses, she gets pregnant, she has a baby, she becomes dependent on her partner. Her partner is the one working, and he's got the financial control in the relationship. And so what you might find is that the person that becomes greater victimized, and why we see more women victimized, is because they're the more marginalized in that group, right? So they're the ones that are taking care of children, and they're not working, and they're socialized maybe not to be as up to speed on what the finances are, and they're to trust their partner. And then if they're religious at all, they might be getting lots of messages about what their role is in that relationship. So you got sort of more strict gender roles, right? So she's losing, she may have started out here at 15, and then as the relationship progressed, the power differential really grew. And what we know is when there's a distinct power differential in a couple where violence is present, we know that there can be increased violence because it becomes a tool that gets used to maintain that control over somebody, to keep them down, if that makes sense. So I think that's, maybe we'll start our own research study and, prove my thesis.
Right, next question. How do sexism and gender role expectations influence domestic violence? When we teach or learn about domestic violence prevention, why don't we spend more time discussing sexism and gender roles' relationship to domestic violence?
Let me say something about sexism and its role here. When there is oppression, when one group oppresses another group, when one group attempts to dominate another group, in most instances of that, when we look at differences in racism, for example, or heterosexist, homophobic kinds of behavior, what we see most of the time is that the group that is the oppressor does not live in the same home with the group that is oppressed. I hope this is making sense to folks. And that one of the things that happens, especially in heterosexual relationships, although the dynamic does play out in same-sex relationships as well, is that you have the group that has the power, the group that has the control in a patriarchal system, which is men, and you have a man who's living in the same house with the woman in this case, who is in the subordinate category or in the group of those who are oppressed. So you have an oppressor living in the same house with the person who is oppressed. And so you have a built-in patriarchal, sexist kind of interplay. And if you have two people who are inclined toward traditional sex role kinds of stereotypes where the man makes the decision and is the breadwinner and the woman perhaps is taking care of the children or taking care of the home, then you have a structure that is in place that provides the opportunity for the oppressor to engage in those domineering kinds of behaviors on a regular basis.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before. I mean, Sarah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I don't know what you guys. I'm not sure. Like that, what Dr. Rubin's talking about. She's approaching this issue from sort of a feminist empowerment model concept, right? We're talking about patriarchy, and I'm down with that. Like that's the stuff that I've done this work for 20 years, and that's what I've read. I don't know if it resonates with you when you hear the notion of patriarchy, if like that resonates with you, if you think that we live in a male-dominated culture. I don't know. What I can tell you just practically speaking, let's just talk maybe from a legal perspective, from a lawyer's perspective. Gender roles and sexism can play a major role in whether or not a woman that's being battered even gets out of that relationship. Because as Dr. Rubin talked about, if you have that kind of structure in a relationship where, and you know what that means, right? In a home where there's patriarchy, it's like you buy into this belief system that the man of the house is kind of the king of the house, right? He's the decision maker, he's the ultimate authority, he's the breadwinner, and that may not look like a lot, all homes now, but I will tell you that it's still very present because many of the women that I visit with are living in those homes. And so the impact is that yes, the violence is occurring, but it's also making it very difficult for her to get out because legally speaking, she wants to leave that relationship and she wants to take her kids and protect her children, but she's been a stay-at-home mom, right? She may have some real difficulty because while there's been some violence in that home and she's going to try to tell the judge about that violence and try to get the judge's attention and make sure that she can continue to be the primary parent, if her earning ability is diminished in some way, if she's never been out in the workforce, if she's never paid bills, if the house is not in her name, if the car is not in her name, then this idea of sexism or patriarchy may sound academic, but it's really not. It's very practical in her world because her ability to be able to get out of that relationship is minimized significantly. We often ask ourselves, well, why do people stay in these relationships? And I will guarantee you there are very practical reasons why people stay in these relationships. And that's, one of the things Sarah does in her work is when she's counseling with people is dealing with some of those very practical considerations. So, I don't know, I hear Dr. Rubin talking and I wonder, like I said, that stuff really does it for me. Like, I listen to that, the academic stuff, but, you know, I want you to understand that it does play out very practically in people's lives. And, you know, this notion of patriarchy and sexism plays out every day in many of these relationships. Of the thousands of people that are calling us or coming in to see us, the power differential in that relationship is tremendously off. Their ability to make their own decisions, and many times it's based on the fact that they're women. And so that's what we mean by sexism and patriarchy playing a role in this domestic violence.
I think it's important to remember too, when I've worked with clients, is that idea of patriarchal household is, in the beginning, may not always be a bad thing. I mean, for these women who maybe she got pregnant early, young, and you know, her partner said, I'll take care of you, you know, I have a job, I'm a good doctor, and she thinks that's great. And so he provides for her, and so for a few years they rock along and they're doing great, and they have a few more kids, and she's just a stay-at-home mom. And then 7 years later, boom, he hits her. You know, and so then, you know, that just, I want you guys to realize in the beginning that's not always a bad thing for clients. It's a good thing and it's positive, but then, like Donna said and Dr. Rubin said, it leaves them dependent. And so it really impacts their ability to get out of that relationship. And it also kind of implies those social rules of, it maybe it's the woman's job to keep the home together. Maybe you didn't try hard enough to save your marriage. You know, I hear a lot of times that women get that pressure put on them. It's up to you to make the marriage work. You know, go to counseling. A lot of times, religious leaders will stress that on our clients and say, you know, divorce is sin. You can't get a divorce. You're committed to make this marriage work. And so I think there's just so many factors that play into that.
Good, complicated questions.
Before we keep going, I just want to remind you guys that if you do have questions as we're talking and you start to think about something that you wonder about, please flag down one of our volunteers. They'll bring you a question sheet. They'll bring it up to me so I can ask you a question, okay? Going along with that, another one of the questions we get asked a lot and was asked today, why do victims stay with their abuser? We touched on this a little bit, but do you want to go a little bit more in depth?
I think, you know, our statement at Friends of the Family is, you know, we always hear that, why doesn't she leave? Why does she stay? Why doesn't she leave? Just leave. But I think our question really needs to be, why doesn't he stop abusing? But, you know, and I think we answered a little bit of that, you know, why does she stay? And the financial obligations and the, you know, social pressures to stay in a marriage and make it work. She's got dependent children. She may not have a family support system. But I think we really try at Friends of the Family to kind of turn that question around and put the accountability on the abuser and say, why doesn't he stop these abusive behaviors?
Well, also, I often challenge people because I believe that most of us have had some interaction with some form of domestic violence because it's that present. So whether you knew about it, or you had a friend or a family member, you know, somehow it's sort of like that, was that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or something. I feel like it's kind of like that. I always challenge people to ask themselves whether or not they really ask that question. You know, and most of the time you have. Most of the time you're watching on TV or you have a friend or a family member, you can get pretty frustrated. And that is the question that we go to. But I will tell you the reason why I think we do that is because that's just the simple question to ask. Because we don't want to get into the complexity of it. It's just way easier to judge a victim and say, you know what, I don't get that. Why does she stay? But if I put in front of you like an anecdotal description of someone's life, and the problem, like if you were in a class and I put in front of you, okay, if our question is why does she stay, then why don't we answer that question? Because there are thousands of reasons why she stays. And if I put a description in front of you and say, okay, here's someone's life. Here's what you got, okay? You got a mama with a couple kids that's with her husband. He's been abusing her for years. She doesn't have the cars in his name, the house is in his name. She doesn't have access to finances. She went to the doctor to go talk to the doctor about feeling bad, and she has anxiety and depression, but the doctor wasn't like the good doctor here. The doctor here didn't ask, well, is someone hurting you, or try to explain it, what did they do? What did they do? Gave her a drug, and then gave her a diagnosis, something good like bipolar or severe depression, something that's going to really help her when she goes to court to try to get custody of her kids. All right? So I give you that description, and I say, you solve it. Solve it. What's she going to do? And then you really start to have a more practical conversation with yourself. And you realize that asking that question, why does she stay, is so simple-minded. And it's really just a judgment. Because you're not walking in her shoes. And I guarantee if you've ever said it to somebody, what they're thinking to themselves is, well, first, you've just joined her batterer and colluded. Because what you've said to her is, what's wrong with you? Why wouldn't you just leave? I'd never let anybody do that to me. You should just leave. You know what she's thinking? Well, no, duh. Thanks for the brilliant piece of advice. I really appreciate that. That was truly helpful. I'd never considered that before. But it's just not useful. And it's also very dangerous. Because when is the most dangerous time for someone who's victimized? Anybody know? When what? When you leave. Why? If domestic violence is about power and control, right? Control. Right? When you leave, what are you doing? You're taking back your control. And so if you happen to be with someone that is potentially homicidal, you might get killed. And I don't know about you, but I've been to 4 funerals of clients that have been killed in the 18 years I've done this work. And I bet you all of them got advice from somebody that they needed to leave. It's bad advice. They need a referral to a place like Friends of the Family, and they need safety planning. But they don't need your opinion about whether or not they stay or leave. That's my only soapbox. I'm sorry.
You mentioned about men and why don't they stop hitting, but do you have any numbers on men that actually stop hitting women? It seems to me like once that behavior starts, it wouldn't stop.
That's actually another question that we have. How often do you see abusive relationships change? How likely is it for the abuser to continue the abusive action?
I think that's a really hard question to answer. We, as an agency, and for me personally too, I believe that everybody is capable of change. I don't think that there's anybody out there that is unfixable if you give, but there are people out there that are not capable of change. And working with the batterers at Friends of the Family, we do have our success stories that come back and they help hold other men accountable and help co-lead groups. And so it's really encouraging to see that. But I think to give a number or a statistic on that, I don't know if any. I think it would just be, because it's self-reported. We take them at their word. If they're not coming in for a parole violation or at the court's order, we don't know.
There's some research about recidivism, like what you're talking about after like battering intervention programs. The problem with measuring recidivism with battering intervention programs is all you're then measuring is if someone's reoffended in such a way that they've gotten caught up in the criminal justice system again. And the problem with that is that it only is looking at a very small piece of what domestic violence really is. And sometimes what we hear from women or victims who their partners have gone through a battering intervention program is that, well, they stopped hitting me, but they got much better at the emotional abuse and the control because they learned what was criminally not allowed, but then they escalated, because I kind of think of domestic violence as like a toolbox. So an abuser, someone who wants to be in control, is going to use whatever tools are necessary. So sometimes it's a screwdriver and sometimes it's a hammer, depending on how you get the results you want. And, if he's learned or she's learned that the hammer gets him, you got to go to jail if you use a hammer, then he may stop using the hammer, but he may escalate in these other behaviors that aren't criminal. And so it's really, really difficult to measure and answer your question. But Sarah's right. Here's the great news. We absolutely 100% believe that domestic violence in all of its forms is a choice. It's not because you're an alcoholic, and it's not because you're bipolar, and it's not because you know, whatever the excuse is. It's not those things. It's a choice, and the brilliant thing about it being a choice is what? You can choose differently. And so we absolutely believe in the power of change. We wouldn't run a battery intervention program if we didn't. And we do have success stories.
And I want to answer that question, but before I do, I want to answer the previous question. The answer to the previous question about why does she stay and that is the wrong question to ask is, it is, like much of what we're talking about here, complex. But let me say this, let me just offer one idea about that. One idea about why it is the wrong question to ask. Why does she stay? Why doesn't she leave? And the answer is this. If you imagine that here's a batterer, okay, right here's a batterer, and along comes, let's say we have a male batterer, the typical situation, and along comes a female victim. And let's just say that this woman follows your advice and leaves. Well, down the road comes another woman, and now she's in a relationship with this man. And let's say somehow she goes to see the attorney, and she goes to see the counselor, and she goes to see the police and the physician, and she leaves. And down the road comes another victim. So you see what's happening here. If you just fix this with getting this one woman out of the relationship, you have not fixed the problem. Okay? Okay. So to answer the other question, here's what the research says about outcome. And it's really, these studies are problematic. And one of the reasons that they're problematic is because they offer false hope. You have a woman whose husband or partner goes to the battering intervention and prevention program, and then she believes he's going to come out and he's going to be fixed, and he's going to be better, and he's not going to be violent anymore. And I'm not saying there aren't any successes, I'm going to give you the numbers. But there is really a question of, is there false hope here? If you imagine that there are 100 people who go to a battering intervention program, 100 batterers. There are follow-up studies that are done at 6 months after the program has been completed and 1 year after the program has been completed. And if you look at those two markers, what you find, first of all, is that only 75 of those original 100 people finish the program. Of those 75 who finish the program, at the end of 6 months and 12 months, you find that 25 of them, this is 25 of our original 100, there are reports, self-report by the batterer and partner report, that there hasn't been any battering. So you get numbers that look like they're around 20-25%. But just because someone doesn't hit doesn't mean there's not a problem. Because if my partner is this woman in the corner, forgive me for picking on you, but if my partner is this woman back in the corner and we're at a party, all of us are at a party together, and let's say I haven't hit her in a long time, but she's talking to someone and I don't like it, now I can stand across the room over here and look at her and give her the message. Can you see this look I'm giving you? That's a bad idea, don't do that, or things are going to be bad. And that's still abusive, and that's still severe emotional control, and he's never hit her, and it looks like a good outcome in these recidivism studies. Thank you for your time.
It's a great example too. I love the standing up and doing that, because one of the things about physical violence that's so profound is an abuser can stop using physical violence, but this is indelicate, and I'm the lawyer, so I'm allowed. It's the gift that keeps on giving, I often say. You can hit somebody once, or batter them, or strangle them, or grab them and push them, or pull their hair, or kick them, or all the terrible things that we hear, and you can do it one time. And then you don't have to do it anymore, because all you got to do is give that look. And you know, I learned my lesson when you put your hands around my neck and squeeze till I got ligature marks on my neck. I learned I don't want your hands on my neck again. like that. So I'm gonna move away and not talk to this person. So now my batterer has accomplished a level of control that he once accomplished by strangling me. He's now accomplished it by just a look. Why? Because of the actual physical incident that occurred. Because it is something that keeps on giving. It has power.
When you look at the stalkers that are out there, and I like the example that Dr. Ruby gave with one person here and the multiple partners, many times what we'll see is the batterer will get in trouble with the law for stalking someone or abusing someone, and he'll get rid of that partner and then get another one. And many times we see these type of stalkers, they'll pick someone that looks physically the same personality, they look for somebody they can victimize, and the stalking really is a prelude to bigger and all the way to murder. And there's been cases where people have stalked people across the country. You know, they just get so fixated. And so even the small crime of stalking, when Texas laws were terrible a few years ago, they're still not the best in the world. I had a beautiful case as far as the crime goes, and we knew we had them in court, and the law just wasn't enough. One of our students actually went down to the legislature and got some of the laws changed for us because of the stalking case. So
They're actually, in the next legislative session, it's one of the top priorities for the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault and the Texas Council on Family Violence to go in and try to modify or change that stalking statute, because it's real hard to prove up stalking. It's very difficult.
it's very frustrating when you know that it's happening, you have all the evidence under the law, but the law isn't sufficient enough for you to stop that.
The other thing to remember is that a lot of the batterers have been battered as children. The violence, again, keeps on giving from generation to generation. The victims in the relationship may have watched their mothers be abused, their grandmothers. It can continue on and on down the line. And sometimes that makes it very hard to leave or for the batterer to stop because they don't know any different. It doesn't make right, but they don't know anything different, and it's hard to be different if you've never ever seen anything better. And it becomes a big unlearning, relearning process. And one of the things that I always talk to my patients about is if they've been in an abusive relationship, sometimes they'll talk about, well, I got out. Well, have you talked to somebody about trying to stay out in another relationship? Because by your history, you have no idea what a healthy relationship is. You have never in your entire life seen one. Maybe you need to talk to someone so that you can learn what is a healthy relationship, so that you don't wake up and realize you're in the same relationship with a different person. They just don't know. They've never seen anything better. They just don't know.
That hits a little bit on my next question. Taking a step back from why doesn't she leave, why did she get into a relationship in the first place? Why are most women classically attracted to bad boys and then act surprised when he's physically or emotionally abuses her?
Oh, I love this question. All right, first of all, most batterers don't look like a classic bad boy. That's our first problem, because if they did, we could learn how to stay away from them. But there's a lot of debate about this issue, and you're going to get a lot of different answers on this from probably even from this panel. This is just world according to Donna, so take it for what it's worth. But I don't think that women or girls go out looking for an abusive partner. I don't believe that. I think it's baloney. I've heard people say that, and I don't buy it. I do think that we are socialized to want to be in a relationship above all else. That we learn when we're growing up as little girls that that's where we get our value. That we're not whole until we have that other person in our life. And then history, family history, like the doctor's talking about what you've experienced in your world. I have a lot of clients who didn't grow up in homes with family violence, but they were sexually abused. And what happens when you get sexually abused and you grow into adulthood is your boundaries are off, your sense of safety has been punctured, and so you may not be willing to advocate for yourself. So some of the times how I explain it to my clients is, I think that a batterer, he is targeting. She's not looking, he's targeting. He's finding what's going to suit the easier person to dominate and control. So I think, go with me here sort of theoretically, this isn't really what happens, but that a batterer might have 10 women or 10 girls standing in front of him, and he might walk up to the first one and kind of push her back. And, that one might be like, hell no, no, I'm out, right? And then he goes to the next one, he might kind of push on her. And that one might be like, oh, what did I do? How can I'm so sorry. So more willing to take responsibility for his emotional well-being. And so, this looks like a contender, and so that's why we see that domestic violence in relationships, if you got hurt really badly on your first date, I haven't met a battered woman yet that on her first date is when she got pummeled and got her head beat against the windshield, right? And went back for seconds. I haven't met her. Who I've met is a young woman where it slowly progresses in the relationship. And it's like a tangled web. So she's kind of stuck up in it by the time it gets real bad. So we often talk about domestic violence at batterers. There's a difference between gaining control and maintaining it. Does that make sense? A batterer's behavior, his strategies look different when he's trying to gain control over his partner. And then once he's got it, how he maintains it. So, for instance, lots of text messaging, calling, showing up, wanting to be with me all the time, right? It discouraging me from going to see my mom because he really wants to hang out with me and he doesn't think my mama likes him, right? And to a young woman, what does that feel like? Is that bad? That's good. We like that because we're socialized to like that. Oh, that means he really likes me. And we're not teaching young people about triggers and red flags. And that's not violence, right? It's not violence. It's not hurting me. He's texting me. He's calling me. He's taking an interest in what I wear and how I wear my makeup and how I wear my hair. And those are things that are not violent. But the young woman that responds to that many times is the young woman that gets stuck later in a relationship and becomes violent. Because I'm guessing that there are some young women and some young men out here that would date somebody and within a week start getting lots of text messages and them showing up at your work, and you decide, that kind of creeps me out, brother. I don't prefer you not text me so much or not call me, right? And a healthy guy says what? I'm gonna back up. But an abuser doesn't. He keeps going. No respecter of boundaries. And so I really believe that most people that end up in these relationships get targeted. And then once they're targeted, they don't know they're being targeted, and they're just engaging in what they think is sort of normal, healthy relationship. And they kind of have a bad feeling, but they don't validate it, and then they end up getting stuck because they get pregnant, or they move in with. A lot of my clients moved in with their partners real quick. 2-3 months, they're living together. They're now sharing, finances, and so they're stuck now, and it makes them more at risk for being physically abused. Does that resonate?
Yeah, and I was thinking, in my work with clients, I think it's a real shame that misconception, it really resonates with clients who've been in abusive relationships. They really take that on. There's something wrong with me. I'm picking these guys, and I have clients and my picker's broken. I find these guys, and so they're taking on all the responsibility for these abusive behaviors that are not their choice. And so kind of what I try to do is empower clients to notice those red flags and set up more appropriate boundaries. And a lot of times for our clients who have been in abusive relationships before, setting boundaries doesn't feel good. It feels rude, it feels icky, they don't like it, they don't know how to do it. And so it takes a lot of re-education about, it's okay to say stop texting me. It's okay that you were creeped out when he said I love you on the first date. That's not really normal, okay?
That's a red flag, by the way, in case you didn't know.
So, I mean, it really is, it saddens me to see clients that really kind of take that as a part of their well-being and their self-concept, that something's wrong with me that I'm going out and I'm finding these men, when really the reality is, like Donna said, vice versa. And so I think what an important part of what we do at Friends of the Family is our community education department works really hard on educating our middle schoolers and junior high kids on dating violence and what that looks like and how that escalates and boundaries and that sort of thing.
We are getting a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and move it along a little bit. Next one we have, how does domestic violence in queer relationships differ or resemble domestic violence in heterosexual relationships?
It's the same. Oh, there are a couple of differences, now that I've said that it's the same. There are a couple of differences. One of the big differences is if somebody is involved in a same-sex relationship, but they are not out, say to their family or to their work, then you have another mechanism by which an abusive partner can control. If you leave me, I will tell your parents that you're a lesbian, that you're a gay man. If you leave, I'll tell the people who you work for. And so that's another way to control. The other issue that comes to mind is that, and this is particularly true, more so for lesbian women than for gay men, if a lesbian woman is in a battering relationship and she presents to a shelter, the shelter they'll do an intake interview and then they will admit her to the shelter. But if her partner wants to find her partner can call Denton County Friends of the Family and say, I'm in an abusive relationship, I'm a victim. And so there will be an intake interview, and then she's admitted to the shelter, and now she's in the shelter with her victim. And she's been basically stalked into the shelter so that the victim hasn't been able to get away, even in a place that would, under ordinary circumstances, be considered one of the safer places to go.
Now, of course, Dr. Rubin, you don't mean specifically, because we're much better about that than the
Denton
average
County,
shelter.
or Denton County Friends of the Family is.
No,
Of course they are.
We go on high alert over there, so we're looking for them. But in addition to what Dr. Rubin's saying, there are all kinds of complexities when you talk about marginalized communities, and obviously, gay and lesbian communities are marginalized communities. And so the same is true. There are, immigrant populations that have special things about their situation that make it harder for them. And so, Dr. Rubin has pointed out a couple, but one in particular for gay and lesbian relationships is criminal justice response. And I'm certain that that's not the case with the TWU police, because I trust that they're well educated and responding well, regardless of who's making the report. But I know that it probably wouldn't come as a huge surprise that the Little Elm PD or the Sanger PD wouldn't give you the same response if you were in a gay or lesbian relationship. And so what happens is, in Texas, we have in our penal code, you can commit what's called an assault family violence, which is distinctly different from any other kind of assault. And if you're arrested for assault family violence, it may be a class A misdemeanor, which is punishable by up to a year and fines. But it's different than just a simple assault or an assault that's committed against a stranger or someone in a bar. But for gay and lesbians, oftentimes you won't get the assault family violence arrest, and you want it to be assault family violence. I mean, if they live together or they're dating or they're in a relationship, you want them to be arrested for assault family violence. Why? Because if you're arrested for assault family violence and you get prosecuted for that, then a part of your punishment may be a battery intervention program that you need. But if you get arrested and you don't get arrested for assault family violence, then you're not going to move down the track to get the correct referral and to get the correct sort of treatment for what you're engaging in. So that's still an issue depending on where you live in the country. Obviously, some law enforcement agencies that are in more urban areas that are more comfortable with the gay and lesbian communities are going to be much better about that response. But it's still still something that if you ask gay and lesbians that live in these communities out here in the Denton County area, they would likely tell you if they had family violence issues that the criminal justice response is not as that they're marginalized in many ways because of that status.
I was once in an abusive relationship, and when I finally got out of it, my ex-boyfriend kept trying to get me back. But it's been 3 years now, and he's still trying to get me through the internet. Do you think domestic violence has to do with mental disorders, because he just does not get it?
Well, Dr. Rubin,
Yes?
do you have a DSM-4 for that guy?
Unfortunately, most of the individuals who are batterers do not meet any specific criteria for psychological disorders. There's a small percent, about 10% of batterers fall into a category that's called antisocial personality disorder. And these are basically folks who routinely break the law, not just in this kind of situation, but who find themselves in trouble in the legal system somewhat frequently. But that leaves 90% of batterers who do not fall into that category. And when we give batterers, just your regular run-of-the-mill batterer who doesn't have an antisocial personality disorder, when we give those folks psychological testing, what they look like are men. They just look like men. They don't look like men who have a certain kind of psychopathology. They just look like men. And that makes this group of individuals who we're talking about hard to distinguish, even among mental health professionals, without the reported history of actually violent or abusive behavior.
And when you said, he just doesn't get it, I think that goes back to what kind of toolbox does he have to operate out of? It sounds like he does get it, but he's just not choosing to respect the boundaries that you're setting up. And so I think that speaks to his ability to respect boundaries, not a mental disorder. And I think that's what my experience has been in working with batterers is they don't have, all they have in their toolbox is a hammer. And so, they don't respect boundaries and they don't know other tools to do that, so.
Well, and two, it can also be about your response to it, and this is a conversation I frequently have but when you don't share a child with someone, when you're ending a relationship and it can truly be ended, sometimes, again, I think because of the way that we're socialized, even if we're done with a guy and we've moved on, if he emails us or texts us or communicates with us, we feel some obligation to communicate back, even if it's just to, say a few choice words of why you'd like him to stop this behavior. But the problem with any kind of response is that it engages him in an emotional connection, which is what he's seeking. There's a great book for this, so if the person that wrote this question is out there, grab this book. It's called The Gift of Fear by a guy named Gavin DeBecker. He writes about the idea of the gift of fear, trusting one's instinct, but he has a whole chapter in there about stalkers and batterers. And one of his greatest recommendations is that you really should not, there's no reason to engage it. So there's no reason to email back, there's no reason to text back, not even to say, stop it, or I'm going to call the police. That there's once you've made that clear when you split and left the relationship, you don't need to continue to reinforce that because you've already sent your message and created your boundary. And no matter how much you communicate back to stop, he already knows you want him to stop. And if you continue to communicate what you're doing unwittingly, and it's not your fault, but you're engaging him, it's like you ever heard people talk about like 4 or 5-year-olds when you can give kids they can get positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, but for some kids it really doesn't matter whether they get either one because they just want the attention, right? Well, that's kind of what this is. And so this is an example of a person that you don't want to give negative attention to. You don't want to give him any attention. And if that behavior continues, then that is something that you would want to come into friends and family. You'd want to come do a screening and talk to us about, we might get kind of hardcore about what you need to do about taking down your Facebook and taking down your MySpace and changing your text. If you really want it to end, we might have to engage in some real guerrilla tactics to cut off a little bit so that you can kind of lay low for a couple months and see if you can divert his attention to somebody else. And so those are some things that we do and we can talk about.
All right, next question. My partner was abused in a past relationship, and I was wondering what are some ways I, as her new partner, can help her get past her abusive past and know she can trust me.
I think a lot of it just takes time and asking questions about, a little bit in general about what happened, not to make them go through everything, but maybe to give them some choices in terms of what they would like. Asking them choices about where would you like to go? Would you like to go this place or this place? Not so much, because sometimes they've been in a relationship where they had no choices at all, and to say you choose is just, they don't know what to do with that. But you can give them a few things and respect their answer. And respect them in terms of, how far they want a relationship to go. They may have been in a relationship where they couldn't say no. And asking them or communicating with them, it doesn't always have to be verbal, but allowing them to be the one to be able to say, let's stop, or looking to see, is that uncomfortable? But just trying to be supportive and giving them freedom and choices and showing them that you do respect them, that you want to hear their opinions, listening to them as they talk about their day, the things that are important. Because a lot of times in relationships, it's all about the batterer. It's nothing about the person as an individual, and respecting them as an individual and telling them what you like about them, or what gifts they might have to bring into the relationship, or things that are fun, but giving them sincere compliments, but knowing when to back off, so that you're not overwhelming them with, I get all this attention, what do I do? The last time that happened, I don't want that to happen. And then they be back and forth in the relationship. They may be, I'm in it today, but I think I want to go. And just trying to be supportive as a friend. I don't think there's any one right way to do it, just like all victims are not the same, all perpetrators are not the same exactly, but trying to show that you care and respect them as an individual, because they were just an entity, and that they weren't really respected for who they were.
And I think too, like you're saying, it's complex. Depending on what kind of abuse it was in the past, can influence that person's relativity in a new relationship. And so from a lot of my clients, I hear that new relationships are really hard, and each one of their needs is different from their new partner. And so I think, like you were saying, it's really important to listen and to hear what they need. Don't imply or don't assume they need certain things, but really be open to that communication with him. But also recognize that, to harp on my counseling soapbox, that sometimes as a new partner, you're not the best person for them to process things with, because it can be just as traumatic for the new partner to hear all of the abusive experiences that they've experienced, and so that can impact your relationship too. So encouraging them to maybe seek some outside counseling, and recognizing that once they start working on themselves and processing that in a neutral environment, that can help them come back to a new relationship, maybe on a more even keel, or so recognizing your limits too as their new partner.
Well, and also know that at Friends of the Family, we provide services to what we call secondary victims. And as a partner or someone that's been victimized, you would be considered a secondary victim, which means that you can come into the Friends of the Family, go through an intake, and receive counseling. Sarah's here on campus, and certainly as a part of her job with Project Red, she can certainly counsel someone that's a partner, someone that's either been sexually abused or been in a physically violent relationship. And that can make a big difference. If you're just working on your own helps you be a better partner, and then you can encourage that self-reliance in somebody else and independence in somebody else. And you can you can model the behavior of getting counseling, and that it's okay, it's cool.
We are running a little low on time, and I'm going to try to get through as many more as we can. What do you do if you are the child and can't leave the violent home? If CPS has already come and gone?
Depends on how old the child is as to what kinds of choices are available. A very young child doesn't have as many choices as a teenager does. A very young child who is aware of what's going on, that it's not right, they're scared. Their only choice may be to find that teacher who may help them, that one person in the family, their friend's mom who is in a good relationship who will help them. It's very difficult, I think, as children to be able to do that as young children. As teenagers, there's more freedom to do that. I see people who said, my mom abused me, I'm never going there. I moved off with my Aunt Jane, and she took me in because she knew what was going on. There may be cases where the person can go. It depends on how old they are. They might be able to present themselves to friends of the family, that kind of thing. There are emancipated minors in Texas for people who do not live at home, are able to care for themselves, but it's very hard, especially in this economy, for a teenager to be self-supporting. It's very hard for people who are well beyond the teenage years sometimes to be able to do that. So, again, there's some situational places to that as to where can they go to be safe and be believed and not be sent back. But I've had students who come through who said, one relative or a friend, or they found someone who would hear them and listen to them and was willing to take them in. And sometimes the abusive families are just like, fine, we just don't want to mess with that anymore, we'll just go on. There's usually enough victimization going on in the home that somebody else can go to do it.
And it can be so traumatic to be trying to reach out for help and feel like the agencies that are set up by our government to help us and to help children, protect children, when they come and go and they seem to really just kind of miss it. That can be so traumatic when you're asking for help. And so I always encourage people to keep asking, keep telling. If you need help, don't give up, because I've heard good and bad experiences with CPS. I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, and so just keep asking. We do outreach presentations through our community education department to even our elementary age schools. I don't know if any of you have heard of Bumblebee, but we talk not only about good touch, bad touch, but that sort of thing. But just keep asking for help, and I know it can be so frustrating.
Calling 911, I know that's so cliche, but many children don't, and if children can learn or feel empowered to call 911 during an assaultive incident that's occurring, good police departments are going to take statements of children that are verbal. And truthfully, even though CPS may have come and gone once, they can come again, they keep coming. And eventually, especially if a child's calling 911, they've got a good 911 reporting of the kids, and then the kid, makes a statement to the police, and even if mom's not willing to give a statement, if the kid's willing, all you guys need is someone to tell you what happened, and have probable cause to make an arrest.
Every phone call we get, we report. Anytime I file a family violence case, I have to produce the recording of the outcry call. So all recordings, either at the car tapes and the tapes going into our police department, we produce those as evidence.
So, I just think that, the more that we can teach children to call 911, if they're able to and verbal and capable of doing that, you're finding more and more law enforcement agencies are making CPS reports at family violence scenes, whether we like it or not, and there's lots of debate about that, but that's okay. there are governmental agencies out there that are intended to help, and, you know, believe it or not, it may seem like CPS doesn't do anything, they may come out and close a case, but they've got this like massive database, and it's just got everything in it that they've ever done, and every time they've been to your house, and everything you said to them, and eventually it's gonna catch up with you. And if your kid's calling 911 and making statements, and the police come out, and they finally make an arrest, and then CPS comes out, that kid may actually get some traction.
Moving right along. Only about 15 more minutes. I'm going to try to get through 3 more questions, okay? If a friend was being abused, are we able to report the boyfriend? If so, can we press charges for the friend?
Yeah, I'll look to the attorney.
And the police officer, I mean, it depends. If you witness an incident, I mean, look, can you all just call the police if you're seeing someone get beat up? Please. I mean, that is the absolute right thing to do. There's no question about it. You really have an obligation to do it. And it may be hard because it might be your friend that's doing the act of violence, or you may have a friend that you know is going to get mad at you to call the police because she doesn't want you to call. But that's a criminal act and you need to report it. And then you need to make a statement so that the police have something to go on. And your friend may not give a good statement, and in the end it may not go anywhere, but you never know, because in Denton County, you know, first of all, most of the police departments have mandatory arrests, and they go out, and if they find probable cause, even if the victim isn't giving them a good statement, they have witnesses that are giving them statements about what happened, and she has some injury or he has some injury, and they may take somebody to jail. So even if nothing else comes from it, the person that battered got a consequence. Even if he doesn't get prosecuted, he got a consequence. He got taken to jail for a night or a couple nights. And then, you know, you can cooperate with law enforcement. You know, she may not be willing to. Maybe all the DA needs to continue to prosecute the case is, you know, a witness that saw what happened. I mean, that's enough to get it done.
But if you didn't witness it,
Yeah.
it's hearsay.
Yeah.
Still come forward, because you never know. You know, we'll follow up on it to see if there's any truth to it.
And I mean, that's the value of living like in a university community with a responsive on-campus law enforcement agency is they'll be more in the business than like, you know, normal police departments will. You know, I mean, I would call that about my college, Austin College, and its, you know, campus police. I mean, they'll do things that normal police agencies won't do, like come and track the person down and just ask them some questions and get to the bottom of it. And so it's never a bad thing to shine a light into a dark place. And when violence is happening, it's a pretty dark place. And so it's never bad to shine a light in that dark place. And if you do it in a careful and conscientious manner that's not intended to harm or put the victim in an unsafe situation.
Thank you. Next, how would a person who is in an abusive relationship get out? If this person is scared to death of their abuser, is there a number to call or a place to go?
Friends with a Family has a 24-hour crisis line available that, you know, I passed out some brochures and it's on it. That's available Christmas, Easter, you know, any day, any time, and that will get you screened into our shelter. Okay, so if you don't have a safe place to go or friends to go stay with, if you don't have an adequate safety plan, that is always available. And I think that's really important for people to know. If you're really that afraid for your safety and you don't feel like you have a secure place to go, our crisis line is available.
And just so you know, the Project Rev brochures that we have here all have the crisis line for Friends with Family on the back. So if you pick one up, you'll have that just in case you ever need it.
So the other thing to know is that shelter is not the only option. Most people that get battered don't want or need shelter, or they don't want to come to shelter. They have an idea of what it is, but it's not. But the vast majority of the services that we offer happen in our outreach office. You can call that crisis line. They can get you an appointment. They'll get you an appointment if you have an immediate safety issue. They'll let you walk in the next day, and they'll get you in the very next moment that we can see you. And when you come in, you'll meet with either one of the counseling staff or the advocacy staff, and we'll do an intake with you. It lasts for about an hour and a half, and it's the time for us to gather some information about your story and for us to engage in our own assessment of your danger, the level of danger. And from there, we then we'll make recommendations to you about what we think a good path for you to travel is. So whether or not you need a protective order, we'll explain how to get a protective order. We'll go with you and we'll help you. If you need financial assistance, we'll help you with that. If you need counseling to kind of get yourself to the place where you feel like you can get a protective order, we're going to help you with that. You know, the folks that work at Friends and Family they're experts. They're really good at what they do. And really what you need when you're in that situation is you need an expert. Just like if your car's not running right or your body's not working right, you go to an expert. You don't try to figure it out on your own and you don't ask your buddy. You go to an expert, and you guys have one in this community that we're all well trained. We're good at what we do and we're passionate, and we know how to help you stay safe. We do it every day. It's not our first rodeo. So you call us, you get an appointment, you walk in the door, and we will help you for free.
What would be the most effective way for women and men to make a change, not only for themselves, but for the rest of society?
Shoot that right at me. You know, the simple answer that comes to me is to do something. There are, not to just sit back, not to know that something dangerous is going on, but to do something. Now, that something might be to contact Denton County Friends of the Family, or that something might be to go to the counseling center here on campus, or Project Rev. Yes, I'm very passionate about Project Rev. But what I would say is, whatever you can think of to do, even if that means talking to a friend so that the two of you can put your heads together and try to figure out what to do. There are lots of right ways to go about trying to make a difference, and I couldn't begin to try to list them all for you. There are political ways, there is advocacy, there are lots of ways to do this, but I would just suggest that you do something.
The other thing is when you're talking to people, sometimes people will put out that little signal, that little thing just to say, I need some help. And they're looking for someone to respond to them as an individual. Maybe no one else is listening to them. They're in this situation and they're starting to make that overture out there. Is trying to hear. We're all so busy with so many different things. There's so much going on. But if you hear that little remark that sounds like there may be something going on, ask that question. You know, oh, what are you thinking of? Tell me more about that. People may come out and ask for something. Part of when we see anyone for a well woman exam, for mental health, for anything like that, is we ask a question. Have you ever been abused? And we did, sexually, verbally, emotionally. And some people are like, well, yeah. And nobody ever asked me. And people didn't know, even though there's lots of publicity, that they can go out. People finally say, well, yes, I was abused as a kid, was in the home, and nobody believed me. And they need to clean that up. And it's the little things that if somebody just gives an ear, you may pick up on something. So, maybe you have an issue, you're being victimized, but maybe there's someone else that you can give that listening ear to, someone else who may be in a situation where you've got some referrals. Denton is not the only city that does have places for people who are victims of abuse. They're in Dallas, they're all over the place. They're in a lot of places. You can have someone who's calling you from California saying, this is happening to me. You can help them find a place where they can call where they are. You can be that person who helps point them in the direction, even though you may not be able to do it through.
The Texas Council on Family Violence website has a list of all the, shelters and outreach services at tcfv.org. So if you are making those referrals, that's probably the best source to go to. So you can kind of make it everything.
Become lawyers and then represent battered women, because there's just not enough of us. So if you could each do that, that would be a big help. If you can't that, become that person. You all know this person. Become that person that if someone had trouble, that's the person they want to call. Become that person. And ask yourself, are you that person? Are you that person that they can trust with confidential information? Are you that person that's not going to be judging? And are you that person that's going to get them connected, that's not going to be their expert, that's going to get them connected to the expert? Are you that person? And if not, become that person.
And I would say everybody here has taken a really good first step in getting more involved. Just get educated, learn more, so that you can be that person. And if you want to get more involved, come talk to us at Project Rev. You can volunteer at Friends of the Family. There's so many ways that you can get involved. We can't, unfortunately, get through all the questions. We have some really great questions that we weren't able to get to. If you'd still like to get them answered, please feel free to stick around and speak to our experts, or email us at Project Rev. Our brochures are in the back with our email address on them, and everything you said is confidential. I also wanted to, before we stop, let Casey, our president from the Project Rev student organization, tell you guys a little bit about our student org and how you can get more involved if you are interested.
Before I start, I just want to give our panel a round of applause. My name is Casey, and I'm president of the student organization that we have here. And all the events that we've had this week have been because we've had a great coordinator and a great student organization that we've had a lot of volunteers to come out and help us put these events on. And it's not over yet. Next week on the 19th, you're having Ben Clerk and Safety Suit here, and they're going to come and do a domestic violence awareness concert for us. The tickets are $5, but if you bring something that can be donated to Friends of the Family, your canned good, toiletries, things that can be donated to our shelter, you can get $2 off your ticket. We'll be selling tickets Monday and Tuesday during the lunch hour in the Student Union, and then they'll also be selling them the night of the concert. And so we're really excited. And if you really want to get involved with us, we have a clipboard in the back. And all you have to do is just sign up and give us your name, and we'll put you on our listserv. And you'll start getting the emails that we send out. And if you ever want to volunteer for any of our events, you know, you can just come to the meetings that we have every other Wednesday. And you know, you just sign up and you can come to the events and get cool shirts like this that volunteers get. And it's a lot of fun. So if you have any questions, all the Rev officers are around, and we're wearing dog tags with our names on them and stuff like that. So you can come talk to us or Stephanie or anything like that.
Thanks, guys. And I have, in case you want one of those cool shirts before we stop, I have a couple of questions to ask, and the first person to shout out the right answer is going to get a free shirt. You go grab a shirt. Thank you. So what is one type of abuse other than physical?
Emotional.
What?
Verbal. She said
Verbal.
Verbal.
Very good. One more. What is one reason, we talked about several, not to ask, why doesn't she leave?
Because the batterer needs to stop.
Sorry?
The batterer needs to stop.
That's right. Can we get a shirt right here? Thank you all for coming out. We really appreciate it. If you didn't get lunch, I think we still have, or dinner, we still have a couple sandwiches in the back. Please pick up some flyers for our concert next week. And can we have one more big round of applause for our